Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndal Curtis. Today we'll have our regular look at foreign and defence policy, timely as the Prime Minister prepares to travel on the weekend to Chicago for the NATO summit on the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. Ahead of that summit, the Prime Minister's announced Australia will spend around $100 million a year for 3 years from 2015 to help sustain and support the Afghan National Security Forces after the transition to Afghan-led security is complete. Joining me to discuss these and other issues are Green Senator Lee Rhiannon and Labor Parliamentary Secretary Mike Kelly. Welcome to you all.
Good afternoon, Lyndal.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Lee.
Mike, we've seen the Afghan President announce the third tranche of transition to Afghan-led security, which includes the province where Australia operates, the Uruzgan province. Does the timetable for transition and bringing the Australian troops home, the majority of Australian troops home, seem to be proceeding as planned?
Yes, it's all meshing quite nicely, actually, and we were very keen to see the whole of Uruzgan province be included in Tranche 3 and not be broken up, and that's because we have a very clear operational and capacity building scheme of manoeuvre ahead of us and a timeline that really will fit in nicely with the process that's been announced. And people should understand that the announcement of that Tranche 3 process is a process. It's not an end state in itself. There will be a period of time now through which we work through that pushing forward of the ANSF elements and us stepping back in an overwatch capacity. But there is a period of time coming up now where we should complete our major leaning forward aspects of the security operations at the same time as the capacity of the 4th Brigade is ramped up to enable them to be able to assume control of their own security environment.
Lee, the process of transition will take 12 to 18 months. Do you think that's a reasonable time to ensure the Afghan National Army is capable of operating on their own?
We do need to take advice on this, and that certainly appears to be what is being suggested by those who are in the front line there. I understand on top of the $300 million that you just mentioned, Lyndal, there'll be a further $200 million has been promised for the Afghan National Army Trust. So $500 million for the transition is a lot of money, and what the Greens particularly believe needs close attention is how our aid programs will operate, because while we are now all on the same page that military operations have to come to an end, clearly there is a need for a continuation of overseas development aid in Afghanistan. And at the moment, considering how closely Australian military operations have been tied to the overseas development aid, there is a question mark how that will continue. Oxfam has identified that when those programs are tightly linked, that the safety and the neutrality of our aid programs and aid workers can come into question.
We'll have a bit more of a look at the aid program in a minute. But Mike, what does the ANA need to achieve to accomplish the goal of making the transition complete?
Well, certainly there are a range of capacities and competencies that you're looking at when you're in that training mentoring role. And we have a very clear program in that respect. And when I was there just a few weeks ago, a combined operation was underway in which the Afghan National Security Forces were in the lead. And so certainly the leadership aspects and those competency aspects are really going through those gateways of progress. And I can say that from first-hand observation of what's going on there. General Safar, Brigadier General Safar, is really progressing well as a leader as well. And in fact, the overall Afghan National Army situation in Afghanistan was one of the most progressive pieces of the central governance story there. There are a whole range of other issues, and Lee's right. I mean, we've got to remain engaged on a whole range of fronts here, and our provincial reconstruction team in Uruzgan's done a great job. But in the future, we intend to remain engaged in those key areas of governance, rule of law, the education, agricultural aspects. All of those things are important because, as I've learnt many times in these types of environments, you have to generate a virtuous circle of mutually supporting effort.
Well, the Prime Minister, as we mentioned, has announced that commitment of $300 million, $100 million a year, each year for 3 years. We'll have a little look at what she had to say about it today.
From 2015, Afghan forces will be leading security across the nation of Afghanistan. That's going to cost some money to sustain those forces, just over $4 billion. Australia is prepared to play its part in meeting those costs for Afghan forces. So yesterday, when I spoke to President Obama, he and I discussed Australia's contribution of $100 million a year for 3 years, starting in 2015. So that money will go to assist with making sure that Afghan forces are there, providing for security in Afghanistan.
Lee, apart from providing for security, where should the aid money Australia will be putting into Afghanistan, where should it best be spent to ensure the country is peaceful and stable in the long term?
Well, a number of those programs have already been identified, that when you look at the AusAid plans, they're talking about health and education, microfinancing, and the issue of women's rights come up regularly. So we need to obviously ensure they go ahead. At the moment, there is a question mark over how successful the transition will be. Again, returning to that point of how closely military aid has been linked and has actually been using money allocated under the Afghan aid budget that I think most of the Australian public expect is being spent on aid programs. And most of that came out in the last year's estimates, where the Defence Department acknowledged that more than $250 million was actually of overseas development aid, that aid that's non-military aid, was actually put in place by the Defence Forces, Australian Defence Forces. So we now have, how do we separate that? What ability do we have to deliver those programs? And have we got the confidence of local people? Because it has been identified that some of our big aid programs, some schools and health centres were put in the wrong place, were not what locals needed. So we need a lot of monitoring, we need a lot of accountability, and we need to build up confidence with the locals that we are committed to working with them in a non-military sphere.
Mike, how crucial will that long-term spending of aid in Afghanistan be to securing the country?
Well, the good news is, of course, that Afghanistan is a mineral resource-rich country, and in fact the estimates are somewhere between $1 and $3 trillion worth of resource. But it will take some time to develop that and get revenue coming on stream. So something like 10 years is the figure that's been bandied around. Now, there's a gap, therefore, that we need to help them bridge, and particularly, obviously, in resourcing their security sector. But obviously there's some key areas of good governance that will relate to how that revenue stream is managed. And in this time we need to work very hard on that, the accountability, rule of law aspects. But certainly in Oregon Province our aid effort has been well targeted. I've been on the ground and inspected where that money has gone, the girls' school and boys' school, Malalai, and the police training facilities, the new mosque, lots of things that have affected their daily lives, like improvement of the roads. That in itself has really had a dynamic effect on their ability to get to health facilities quickly and also to improve the economic lifeblood of the nation. That's where a lot of effort needs to continue, but certainly we know that building a governance capacity is not a matter of waving a magic wand. We're not going to have a Westminster or Jeffersonian democracy overnight in Afghanistan, and in that respect, apart from the security areas, this will take many decades of constructive engagement to encourage them. So what we need to see is really an incremental progress, a progressive evolutionary track towards where we'd like them to be.
While we're on the subject of aid, Lee, the budget put off reaching what was the Millennium Development Goal, getting foreign aid to 0.5% of gross national income, put that off for a year. Are the Greens thinking of trying to change that in the Senate, or given that the opposition seems to be supporting the government's move, there's no way that would happen?
Well, considering it's in the main budget appropriation bill, we've always given a commitment that we would support that irrespective of what the coalition did. So that's going to go through. So it's enormously disappointing that the government chose to cut back in the area of aid. It's a big chop. It's $2.9 billion.
Although the government says its aid spend is increasing, it's just putting off effectively the last bit of the increase just for 1 year.
Well, but it is a cut. It's a cut of $2.9 billion. Yes, they're saying that they will still reach that target in time. But let's remember the 0.7% target that the UN has recommended was put forward in 1970, and Australia is still struggling to reach it. We've had promises from the Coalition and Labor. It was only 6 months ago, actually, in the Senate, that Labor and the Coalition voted with the Greens on my motion, committing to 0.5% by 2015. 6 months later, both of them have broken their promise, and it really is out of step with what the majority of Australians want. And a recent poll actually showed that 70% of Australians do support an increase in much of this aid spending.
Mike, it's been said that your government has been prepared to hit some of the poorest people in the world in order to achieve its budget surplus. Why take this decision to put the aid spending off for 1 year?
Well, that's certainly not the case, although I will say that, we're all disappointed that we can't reach the targets that we've set ourselves, but the economic circumstances just haven't permitted that. And when you lose $150 billion out of your revenue stream, something's got to give. And certainly we have to make sure that we have a consensus behind that effort in international aid. Now, as you pointed out, the aid is in fact increasing, and we're not walking away from that goal, that target. We've just had to be realistic about the timeline to achieving it, but we are committed to doing it. Certainly, I'm personally very deeply interested in the Millennium Development Goals. I've worked on these issues over the years, and I hope we do get back on track as quickly as possible, but you have to be realistic. You have to be able to pay for these things.
So what do you do as a frontbencher, a parliamentary secretary in the government, to try and hold the government to that commitment to do it, even though it's a year late?
Oh, look, you don't really need much effort. I mean, there's a massive level of support within the caucus behind these goals and targets, and certainly everyone within the government, everyone in the executive is committed to those targets. It's just a question of allowing our government revenue to come back on stream, and we're seeing this $490 billion flow of investment, but that's going to take time to actually generate the revenue we need.
And one quick other final thing out of the budget. The budget took more than $5 billion out of defence, while the government says it won't touch forces serving overseas or equipment for them. It's the second budget in a row where Defence has made a sizable contribution to the savings task. Should so much be asked of Defence?
Well, certainly every aspect of government has to contribute to the effort to get us on track, and having a good general economy means that everyone will rise and fall with the strength of the economy. So I think everyone understands that you have to put the effort in mainly to giving you the economic strength to deliver those security capabilities, and this is only a postponement in some respects of delivering on the full capabilities that we need as a maritime nation. So, this is something that is still a very heavy commitment from the government in terms of the defence spend.
Lee, do you think the government's done the right thing in cutting defence yet again? Is there a point at which we aren't living up to the promise to maintain a good defence force?
Senator Christine Milne welcomed these cuts when she gave her budget in reply speech, and I think it sends a much healthier signal to the region, particularly when you put it up against the aid cuts, which sends a very unfortunate signal to our region, where 18 of the 20 countries are low-income countries where there's high levels of poverty. So when you consider that the defence budget has been given a 3% increase guaranteed for many years, these were a timely move. And let's remember...
I'm sorry, Lee, that's where we'll have to leave it. We've run out of time, but Lee Rhiannon and Mike Kelly, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Lyndal. Cheers, Lee.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please be with us at the same time tomorrow.